Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, yes they did, they absolutely got it right. Here on Liberty Works Radio Network, where liberty does work for you, and this is your host, Tom Navolis, and I am delighted to have you back with me again this week. We had a very interesting program last week, and one of the things that I do want to just kind of take a moment to draw on before I get into what we're talking about today, because what we're going to talk about today is not necessarily what I was really preparing for, and was actually blown out by something that I observed last evening, and I'm going to share that with you in a moment or two. But I wanted to follow back a little bit more on this technology stuff, and many of you are seeing it, but might not be digging into the depths of it like myself and some of my colleagues, because having been in the telecommunications industry and having participated in the very inception portions of commercializing the internet, I've got a lot of insight into all of this stuff. And then as we've seen the ideas of the Google Schmoogles, Doogles, and everything else come about, it's just like, wow. I mean, I was on Facebook when it was still only at the college level, because as a telecom executive, I was able to kind of get in there, take a look at how the technology was operating, so on and so forth. So, man, that's been a long time ago. While Zucky was still a little punk runner, well, he still is a punk, but when Zucky was still a little punk in college trying to develop his technology. Yeah, I did say that, and I'll say it again. Zuckerberg is a punk. He's a little socialist, money-grabbing punk. Now, all that being said, let's get to the reality of what's happening in technologies. I'm going to put there is a link in the promo. I already did that. There's a link in the promo that I'm going to, I think is very, very interesting. It's this fellow, he happens to be a libertarian. So there's some things about him that, you know, I just kind of sit there and go, oh, okay, I take it with a grain of salt. But what he's doing is he's actually bringing to you some of the very, very good information, absolutely precise, absolutely what I understood from other aspects of things that I've done in my past that I really want you to take a look at. So I'd like you to go to either the SamuelAdamsReturns.net and look for the archive of this program midweek. And what you'll do is you'll be able to find in those links for the references what I'm talking about, and I'll identify it. I'll make it a little bit more bold or red or something that you understand that this is the reference on the website that you'll be able to go look at and understand how Facebook and all of Google and all of the other social media is actually being used. What you assume, you know, I mean, come on, you're not conspiracy people on this network, but at the same time, you know, you with all the information you have put together, maybe it is you already seen what I'm going to post for you. But it's very, very interesting, and you should go take a look at it for yourself to understand that we don't need net neutrality. We don't need any of that. What we need to do is for the government, as we talk about all the time, is we need to get the government out of our lives, out of a lot of stuff. So from, you know, that quasi-libertarian perspective, I'm 100% for that. But as I always say, and I'll qualify here again, is that for the majority of the libertarians, they're godless. So libertarianism without God leads to anarchy, which is, you know, not anything that the founders intended. So constitutionalism cannot function according to founders' intent from a pure libertarian perspective. So I want to always be clear on that. Now, what blew today's program out of the water? Geez, let me think about it for a second here. No, I don't have to. What blew today's program and what I was really looking at doing for today out of the water is the Tucker Carlson show on Wednesday night. Tucker finished off his program, and he's going to be doing it for all of the Wednesdays now in March, is about the crisis of men in America. Men in America, I think he even has a hashtag out there that I saw on Twitter on Thursday morning. So very, very interesting. And I will put the links up also to his segments on this, and I will follow that all the way through the rest of this month. Wow, there's really not that many weeks left in the month of March. We're already hitting, today's the 10th. Isn't that amazing? So I think it's going to be very, very interesting, because Tucker is one of the few people that is in what I call the mainstream media, and not necessarily where it should be taught and brought to bear is within the context of the churches, who's identifying this issue. And he has statistics in there that are horrifying. Horrifying statistics about men in America, especially with white men, and the suicide rates, the drug rates, the opiates, all of these other types of statistics as to these problems. What are they? What has caused them? Well, he doesn't know all the answers as to what has caused them. In the second part of his segment, he had a professor, I think he was from the University of Toronto, if my memory helps me whatsoever. But this professor was very, very good. And I think that he identified a number of the problems from a sociological and even a psychological perspective as to what has happened. Now, here's something really interesting, and grab onto this one, okay? I have mentioned over 2 years ago, as I was thinking through this whole crisis of men, over 2 years ago, I was mentioning something that was written, 30, 40 years ago? Let me think about it. It was John Stormer in his book, None Dare Call It Treason, 25 Years Later. Actually, I think he first brought it up in None Dare Call It Treason, which was written in the 60s, but I know for certain that what he wrote then in None Dare Call It Treason 25 years later, he identified right then the difference of the prisoners of war during the Korean conflict. Now remember, it was never a declared war, so the Korean UN action, it was the action, a conflict, not a war, and what happened during World War I and World War II with American prisoners. And there was a greater number of suicides and the willingness to just give in with the prisoners of war in Korea, or from that Korean action. And when they returned to America, there were many of them, unlike my father, who did exceptionally well and has done and raised a great family, and others that I know whose parents came from that, there were so many that had equal to, excuse me, if I look at it, or I'd almost say equal to the issues that we now call post-traumatic stress syndrome, as it went into Vietnam, as then it went into now all of the actions that we've had during the 90s. Oh, the war on terror, as it then came about in 2011. What was it? John Stormer identified it. He identified it very, very clearly in that book. And again, go get a copy. You're going to pay more for the shipping than you will for the copies. And now that I'm telling you that, I better spend a few extra bucks and go out and get some copies of the book before you guys suck them all up. But that None Dare Call It Treason 25 years later in particular, it has the story. John Stormer lays it out. Our educational programs were starting to change after World War II. Okay? They were changing right in that whole period. This is when Deweyism, humanism, all of those isms that were then attacking manhood, attacking insidiously and quietly within the context of the churches, as well as in the educational system, were causing men to try and figure out what it means to be a man. Our founders were very clear on that. And I don't know if I'll get to it in this segment, but I will get to it maybe at the end of the segment and into the next segment, because I think it's very critical. And if there's a way that I can support what Tucker Carlson's doing on his program, just from my little thing that I do here on Liberty Works Radio Network and put up on YouTube, the point is that what we have now, let's see, is 80 years. Let me put it, 80 years working slowly and insidiously on how to destroy family, how to destroy manhood first, how to destroy God and what it means for a man to be godly so that he can be manly. Wow. Which then takes in everything that the humanists have always designed is to take and then destroy the family, which then leaves the door open for the other isms that started in, 1848, the neo-Marxisms that we have. So when we see all of these leftists, especially all of these women, and we have all of these deaths, and racially profiled death, I will tell you that, is that the genocide in the black community by abortion is obviously the highest numbers that there are when you statistically look at abortions. So to me, that is again, the Margaret Sanger destruction of the black race, and I find that extremely offensive. So that's my one opinion on the Planned Parenthood insanity, is that it's an evil of genocide no matter what. And then the other side of it is to take and destroy manhood, destroy marriage, destroy sexual purity, destroy those things that our founders understood as developed from their Puritan, Reformation, Presbyterian, and even those of the other denominational backgrounds. So what we have is a systematic approach on moving away from manliness. Whereas our founders expected men to be men. They expected men to stand strong for family, stand strong for what it meant to govern, self-govern, and then govern at home, and then govern within the community, govern within their businesses, to be able to be those things, those persons, those pillars upon which God had initially created Adam. All right? I'm going to go all the way back to there. It's just the way it is. And when we see what has happened in all of those other areas that I talked about, within the churches, within education, within higher education, and even within government by legislation, what we have seen is the crisis now that Tucker is talking about. So with that, as we are going to come back, I'm going to restart this whole discussion in the next segment with some things from Samuel Adams. And Sam Adams, as you know, he was a manly man. Yes, he was. He was a man that understood his position before God, how to take care of his family, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And we may get into something that I really wanted to regarding Federalist, some of the Federalist Papers, 44, 45, maybe 53, 52, something like that. But come on back in the next segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-Federalists, they got it right, even though the Federalists hinted that they would get it right. They got it right here on Liberty Works Radio Network. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the second segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-Federalists, yes, they did. They got it right. And quite frankly, as I look at the Federalist Papers, the Federalists intimated in many of their writings, especially Madison, that the anti-Federalists would get it right because he kind of collaborated what they were talking about by trying to refute what they were talking about and being predictive of. But that is a whole another portion of the conversation, and even a whole nother idea that maybe someday I'll take the challenge and try and bring you into what that conversation is and how I formulated that based on just the Anti-Federalist and the Federalist Papers alone. What I wanted to get back to with you is that whole idea of Tucker Carlson's Wednesday night segment on the men in crisis in America. It is a crisis. And the beginning of the crisis is that it is, as it is in the whole nation, from my perspective, it is a spiritual crisis. We need to repent before the Lord and living God individually, as well as we do collectively as a group, as churches especially, and as a people in general in what it means to have good governance. Now, I said that our founders thought that it was important to discuss this idea of manliness and that they understood that. And that Samuel Adams, he was the epitome of manliness. And he learned it well because his mother actually helped instruct him in what that would be. How's that, you ask? How can that be that his mother would instruct him in that? Well, his mother instructed him in biblical truth. That's where it starts. You know, I think that when you understand biblical truth, and before I get into this 1771 letter, I would recommend, if you want to grasp some key people that I think were some of the most manly people that ever existed on this earth, well, the first and foremost manly man is Jesus Christ himself, because he is the second Adam. He is the perfection of what God intended for us in a number one relationship with the Father, in that whole idea of the created Adam and who we are as mankind, okay, womankind. So when you look at that and you want to know the number one person that's the manly man, go take a look and go read the Gospel of John just to start with, and you're going to see a manly man in Jesus Christ, okay? Period. Rest of them, all these other Muhammad and all these other religious snakes in the grass, if you will, they weren't manly men. They were perverts, okay? They had some kind of perversion. But when you look at someone that, as he is, that perfect, unblemished, sinless sacrifice, yeah, I got to hammer home on Jesus. Next, I always look at, which I think is more of an example for us corrupt guys and our humanity and all of that. We got to look to Jesus first, but you know, the other guy that kind of aligns with who we are is David. You know, that character. Yep, he was interesting. From his youth, you can take and look. I mean, here's a guy that, you know, killed lions and bears with almost his bare hands, if you will. You know, he takes out a giant with a slingshot. He throws the armor aside. He takes and he goes out and has all of these other issues after being anointed king. But one of the things that David always wanted to do is figure out how to satisfy God and come before him, even in his sinfulness, even when he blew it, even when he did those things that were contrary to what a manly man should be. And so it's a proof case to me that we always have to go to God, even in our sinfulness. And that's the great thing about Jesus, is that he's the one that is there to remove that from us and bring us then to the Father. Okay? So we have a Father image. And I think that's a great problem that's out there, and it's not necessarily taught in the churches either, is that we have a lot of young folks running around out there, a lot of young men or young boys, children that happen to be male. Okay? Male. There is a gender, male. Okay? Get that solid and straight. So we have a lot of these young males running around out there without fathers. So, you know what? The Boys Club and, some of those other organizations like that are great. Boy Scouts, I'm not so sure about anymore, because now they're going weird about maleness. All right? And what I really see in all of this is that when you look at David as that example, we have to have an access to an understanding of a father. And ultimately, that access to a father, an understanding of a father, is who Jesus leads us to in God the Father and what that relationship is. So, I'm moved away further from that 1771 letter on manliness. So let's get to that. Here it is. What we have is that Arthur Lee, who is a very great collaborator out of Virginia with Sam Adams, he wrote to him, and it was a December letter, so that would have to have been in 1770. And so here it is, April 71, and Adams is just getting back to him. And in that correspondence, one of the things, and I'm going to jump right to it, is Adams was talking about openness and sincerity becoming those who are anxiously concerned for the public liberty at so alarming a crisis. And what he was talking about, what was happening, especially with Boston being invaded, Boston under siege, Boston being so wrapped up in all of the British embargo and everything, that there was starvation going on in Boston, except by virtue of smuggling and some other things. So Adams continues on this way. He goes, perhaps there never was a time when the political affairs of America were in more dangerous state. Whoa. Hey, you should be living now. We got all these communists, neo-Marxists, these humanists, these other ists and isms, especially the socialisms and the, Fatah-ism, the Muslimisms and all of that. Oh, well. Anyway, Mr. Adams, please return. Such is the indolence, which is the wanting to avoid activity or exertion, the laziness of men in general. Whoa! Tucker, what were we just talking about here in that Tucker Carlson segment? We've got men that are lazy. Lazy. Wow. Interesting. Okay, so such as the indolence of men in general, their laziness, trying to avoid activity, or their inattention to the real importance of things, that a steady and animated perseverance in the rugged path of virtue, at the hazard of trifles, which a trifle is, a thing of a little value or of importance. So let me go back on that. So that that they're not seeing the important things, and that a steady and animated perseverance in the rugged, I'm sorry, not regard, but I'm reading, get my glasses readjusted here. Okay, it's the rugged path of virtue. Wait a minute, I got to stop there even before I get into this whole thing about the hazards of trifles. The rugged path of virtue. This goes to the whole realities once again, that morality and virtue are not a simple way to go. It's not an easy path. You have to have that mentorship, you have to have the leadership, you have to have the capacity to first be able to identify what is truly manly, what is truly and absolutely moral, and then what is virtuous. What does that mean? What does it mean to have virtue and morality at home, as well as it does to mean publicly? So when we look back at this, he's talking about that a steady and animated perseverance in the rugged path of virtue at the hazard of trifles is hardly to be expected. So here you have a bunch of lazy guys that don't have a capacity to want to climb that rugged path of virtue, and the hazards are these little things of little value, these trifles of importance. And, what do you expect? What do you expect? Don't you expect more? I do. I expect more out of our leadership. I expect more out of our pastors. I expect more out of church leaders. I expect more out of teachers. I expect more. Why? Because we are supposed to govern ourselves and then be able to bring that to others for what? To have a peaceful nation. But a peaceful nation doesn't come by all this intimidation by these leftist neo-Marxists. Oh, my goodness, let me keep on. The generality, or the majority, are necessarily engaged in application to private business for the support of their own families. And when at a lucky season the public are awakened to a sense of danger, and a manly resentment is enkindled, it is difficult for so many separate communities as there are in all the colonies to agree in one consistent plan of opposition, while those who are appointed instruments of oppression have all the means to put into their hands of applying to the passions of men and availing themselves of the necessities of some, the vanity of others, and the timidity of all. I captured this. I have to tell you, it was like, holy smokes. You look at the statistics and you look at those segments that from this past Wednesday that Tucker Carlson put up, and it just brought it. Okay, number one, there's a consistent plan of opposition, all right? And these are these appointed instruments that are out there, all right? We're going to continue on this. I mean, I may not get out of here because we're at the short end of this second segment as we move into the next. And we'll have to pick up on these. But those who are the opposition, look at all the billionaires, the Silicon Valley, the technology stuff that we were talking about at the beginning of that first segment in here. Is the whole idea is that they got the billions, the momentum. They even have the federal government on their side as opposition to constitutionalism and a righteous nation and your manliness, guys. To the extent that what? They have all the means to be put into their hands and apply the passions. The passions. Am I getting a little passionate here for you? You see that. Look at all these people running around and all this Antifa and all the others that are jumping up and down. They're operating on stirred up passion. All right? And availing themselves of the necessities of some. Anarchist, all of that. What do they have, right? The vanity of others. Holy smokes, look at the whole Hollywood crowd. Okay, I'll just leave that. And the timidity of all. So let's really dig into that a little bit more, because I think that absolutely establishes where we are in America right now. And I've got about 15 to 100, 200, 300, 400, maybe 1,000 references at my fingertips right now as to what the founders intended and meant by manliness. So I guess I'm not going to actually be able to get into the Federalist Papers today, because I think there's too much to drive home here and to concentrate on. It's critical that we understand that the founders intended men to be men. As we come back with Samuel Adams, and he'll return here on Liberty Works Radio Network. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. The Anti-Federalists got it right here on Liberty Works Radio Network, and this is Tom Navolis, your host. And I believe this is the third segment, right, Kath? Yeah, we're already in the third segment, and it's like, oh my goodness, we just never have enough time, and I really have to apologize. But as I began in the first segment, and I finished up in the second segment, is that what I was going to talk about in the Federalist Papers is totally blown out. You know, I don't know. Even Madison talks about being manly and that we need men of good character. We need men that are virtuous, that they have that personal virtue as well as the public virtue to be able to govern well. Otherwise, what we end up is the insidiousness of party. We get the whole insidiousness of just all those things that corrupt, and what we see that corrupt good rule. Madison was talking about where I was going to go in 44, 45, and I think 53 and 54, was the idea of that when you have good representation, the expectations are that those in the states would have a good sense, and that what we would have is what he and then John Adams was very, very clear on, is that we would have a moral and virtuous people. So we would have an electorate that was very clear on morality and virtue, so that you would elect moral and virtuous people to be able to work in government, both in state, local, and in the federal government. But, you know, that's a concern. So this is a concern. Here we have in 1771, and we have this whole area that Samuel Adams is really concerned of what's going on. What's happening out there with the people? Who's really ready? Who's really ready to take and stand up against oppression, to stand up against real oppression? You see, you can see the different things people talk about, and we'll get back to this in a minute, but we've had this whole thing going on about the tariffs this last week, and our industry and fair trade and all of that. Well, I got to tell you that our steel industry was first destroyed, absolutely wiped out. Our steel industry was initially destroyed in 1750. 1750. The jealousies of the merchants in England were such that they knew. And even Adam Smith, I'm telling you, get this one. Everybody runs around fair trade, we're talking about all the economics and capitalism and everything like that. Did you know, if you read not just his famous work that everybody quotes from, on his great work? No. The real things that he did when he went into Parliament a couple times, he was saying, you know what, America's going to get ahead of us. We have to do something to put a little bumper on those colonies. We need to quelch them, otherwise they will overcome England. And during that period then, that happened, okay? So in 1750, our ironworks, our smelting, our foundries, our capacity to roll and mill and do all of that was totally shut down. Totally shut down. 1750. Sam Adams saw this stuff, saw a lot of different things happen in banking, economy, What we have going on right now, ladies and gentlemen, you have heard me say this over and over again, is no different than that period of I'll go now to 1750. We're trying to get our ironwork, our mills, our steel mills, aluminum manufacturing back. So, I guess in effect, I always used to say oh, we're kind of like that period from 1765 through 76 when the Declaration was signed. But no, I think right now I'm going to go back, and we're going to take it back to 1750 when all of our steel mills, if you will, our forges and foundries were taken away, shut down, forced to shut down by the government. And we had to buy all of our materials, our steel and everything from good old jolly England. So let's think about that as we go back and we look at this concern in 1771. Here's Sam Adams. He's got this concern. He thinks it's the greatest danger that America's ever been in. I mean, he says that, a more dangerous state. But the thing that he really gets to, and what we have today, and this is the problem in so many different ways as we're seeing people trying to mature and trying to make that step in life, is that we're busy. Yeah. We are really, really busy. And what are we busy with? We're busy with, what's the old thing? Hi-ho, off to work I go. I don't even remember the rest of the whole thing. But you go to work to pay for your truck, to pay for your house, to put the kid to college, to pay the medical bills, to, do all these different things. You're trying to live life, okay? And he talks about that. But he also brings out the whole idea of what is a component that's so dangerous. And this is referring that, my Wednesday blowout with Tucker Carlson is that he's talking about all of these indolences, these wanting to avoid activity, the laziness of men in general. So here's my observation, is that, more people get excited about going to some professional sport thing, sitting there watching it in front of the idiot box if they don't go to the actual venue itself, and they yell and scream and roar and do all of that. But other than that, they do what Mark Gungor talks about in his videos and his seminar on Laugh Your Way to a Better Marriage. They sit there and they have their you that are on the radio can't see what's on the video, and that's the old channel changer. And so everybody's sitting there with their jaw open and just staring into the idiot box going, changing the channel. I know the new channel changers don't make those noises. They're silent. So you can be silent in your own mind, just doing nothing. Lazy. Look, I'm sorry. That was a generalization. And I know most of you that listen to this network, you don't even listen to this network unless you are active. You want to be active. You want to get out there. You want to do something. You want to get your butts out of those seats and your feet on the streets and really make a difference. You want to go to your citizens groups. You want to get in front of your legislators. You participate. Do you? Are you? I hope so. I hope that all the different programming that you're listening to on Liberty Works Radio Network has got you up and going, and that you're not just sitting there listening and sucking it all in and, all that. I mean, that's what happened too much with a lot of the tea parties, is that everybody just kind of sat around and sucked it all in, and, the activism was always those few. Well, that's what Adams is talking about here, too, is that in general, men are lazy. In general, women are lazy as well. But he's talking about men because men should be manly and be leaders in their communities. All right? So anyway, let's just move on and get on with this whole thing here, and where he talks about the whole idea, and I got to hammer it, is that the rugged path of virtue. Can you take on that rugged path of virtue? Bunyan, there was a guy by the name of John Bunyan. If you haven't read him, he was like way back during the Reformation time, and he wrote a book called Pilgrim's Progress. And Pilgrim had a rough time just understanding what it meant to walk through those steps of life because Jesus was the perfect man and trying to understand that whole area of salvation based on that. But how does that apply? You know, you got to look at that. So Bunyan had a good thing there on how to apply that, and that is the rugged path of virtue. And you know what? The hazards are all the trifles. So I think let's draw back now in the time that we're going to have left to the opposition. We have opposition. Now we know that we have opposition because guess what? They've declared themselves the opposition party. So we have the Democrats, and I call them the Democrats, as you well know. You've heard me say that over and over for I don't know how long, is that they're the Democrats. They're neo-Marxists. Their real ideologies are bent and wrapped around either anarchy or Marxism or the neo-Marxism. And in my book, my next book coming out, is that I've got the whole list of the neo-Marxists, and they're teaching this stuff in the colleges. Okay? So if you think you're sending your kids off to college to really learn something that's going to have value for America, well, first off, your kids are going to be in debt because you're going to be in debt sending your kids to a place that they're only trying to indoctrinate them for their neo-Marxist ideologies versus taking and bringing them into an understanding of what it means to be an American within the constitutional confines of our republic. And what does that mean? So that's kind of like where, you know, Adams is talking about here on the opposition, and those that are, you know, they have all the appointed instruments of it. In the modernization of this, I talk about the bureaucrats that are out there. I talk about the IRS, the EPA, and most of the other agencies that are in place that are not constitutional. Okay, yes, Madison was talking about that actually in Federalists. I think it was 53 or 54. Again, I'm not looking at the references that I was planning on looking at, but he was saying that we the people, the populace, if you will, that we would be the ones that recognize these issues, and we'd stand up against it, you know, through our states and our legislatures and those we elect. Wow, isn't that interesting? Well, anyway, as we're getting close to wrapping up, I think we're, what, at the 2.5 minute mark or something like that. Kath is kind of giving me the little flag there out of the control room. As I mentioned last time, control rooms across the library here. And yeah, the library's not finished. It's going to probably take me another year to get some real bookcases, and then the, you know, 50 to 60 boxes of books I have down in the basement, you know, up on shelves. But that's not important. You know that. These are the important books right here, right behind me, when we look at what that is with the Founders Constitution for these programs. And the other set of books that are important are across from me, because that is my whole biblical Christian reference section on several bookshelves like this one. But what he's talking about is the opposition. As we're coming into his last 2 minutes, is the opposition has the money, and it has the will, and it applies itself against the passions of men. It gets them riled up. We see that. All these different rallies, all these different things that we see out there are the emotions, the passions of men that are getting up there. And there's a lot of people that will avail themselves of the necessities. That means, you know, they'll give it up. So you see that with the Antifa and, you know, even the early communists and those that are still out there, a lot of them, you know, they don't mind living in squalor. But then there's those that'll take the advantage in their vanity, like the Black Lives Matter and the Frankens and the Frankensteins and all of the others and the Pelosi's and all of that, who are multimillionaires. So they and their other, Silicon Valley billionaires are the ones that are funding all of this opposition. And then what they're going to take advantage of is the vanity of all of the folks out there. And they're going to take advantage of the timidity of all. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get out of our seats. Let's quit being timid. It's time to take and resist the opposition with the same passions and intellect that Samuel Adams will continue to talk about in this letter that he wrote to Richard Henry Lee. And that's what brought the American revolution to the forefront. It's you becoming that have an understanding in what constitutionalism is so that we can keep it for our posterity and bring back Samuel Adams as he returns next week here on Liberty Works Radio Network.